It is May 30th, 2025, and Russia appears to be moving forward with plans to create a buffer zone between Russia and Ukraine, specifically in northeastern Ukraine in the Sumy region. As we know, that's the region where Kiev was able to launch an incursion over the border into Russia's Kursk region. We've since seen Russia not only do away with that incursion, but also take additional territory there. And now they're working on a buffer zone, as you had Putin announce that last week, and as you have Zelensky complaining and saying that there are around 50,000 Russian troops amassing to carry out what we believe is this plan. All of this comes as we are seeing the drone wars skyrocket between Russia and Ukraine. We're seeing a drastic increase in long range strikes from Kiev's end, which of course means that it's coming directly from the West because they have to be the ones really carrying out these attacks, sending a very powerful message. But we have to remember that the attacks coming from Ukraine and the attacks coming from Russia are having very different results. And that all comes down to the power of air defense, of which Russia has some of the best in the world, if not the best in the world. So where does that leave this conflict right now? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is international relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda. Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Rachel, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always good to have you. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, as we've seen Russia launch some of its largest drone and missile attacks on Ukraine yet over the last week. And now Zelensky is warning that Russia is amassing around 50,000 troops, he says, in the Kursk region, which of course borders Ukraine's northeastern Sumy region. So how do you view the current state on the battlefield? Does it seem like Russia is preparing to launch some sort of an offensive into the Sumy region?
Okay, so first of all, let's address the long range strikes, which is going on the airs. Both sides are actually launching record long range drone strikes against each other, like for the past more than a week at this point. Like the Kiev regime has launched regularly now 200 plus 300 drones every night. Russia, usually actually the numbers of drones that Russia is launching are slightly less. Although you're absolutely correct that Russia did launch the largest one of them that they launched was the largest one that they had launched so far in this conflict that hit 300. But Russia's strikes usually include a number of missiles as well, which of course are far more effective, far more powerful than the drones are. And it has to be said that Russia's drones, for a number of reasons, we could talk about it for an hour, but generally Russia's drones are far more effective. They're far more sophisticated drones. They carry much bigger payloads. The Garand 3s are now jet powered and capable of climbing to high altitudes and diving down. And Russia actually has probably the world's best, hands down, integrated, multi-layered air defense and electronic warfare network, which means only a tiny fraction of the Kiev regime's drones, very tiny, get through, and those that have, I always look to see what the damage is, and I'm very concerned about it. And honestly, after more than 2,000 drones launched in under a week, and I'm sure it's higher than that number. That was just 1 point during the week. So 2,000 Kiev regime long-range strike drones launched in a few days. The damage was still absolutely minimal. So what both sides are doing is a drone war of attrition, right? The goal of this is primarily at this point, the other side's air defense. Also, Russia's hitting military-industrial targets for a certainty. But the goal is, one, to exhaust the enemy's air defense, right? So that you are using everything up by continually trying to shoot it down every night. Hundreds of drones. You run out. You don't use missiles on everything, of course, right? Air defense missiles, interceptors, but you have to use a number of them, and smaller air defense systems. You're just using up assets, air defense assets, like crazy. And the second goal is to map out those air defenses so that missile strikes then become much more, a greater chance of effect, right? So the drone strikes actually help exhaust the air defense and map it out, facilitating greater missile strikes later on both sides, because there's all sorts of rumors about the Kiev regime having restrictions lifted, and do they have the tourists? Do they not? What game is Merit's playing? We don't know about all of these things. So a lot of that's hanging in the air. But both sides are exchanging record drone strikes, and I think we can probably, with how massively drone production has been ramped up on both sides, with undoubtedly, even the Economist admitted this week, Russia is ahead, not just qualitatively but quantitatively. The Kiev regime is still getting their licks in with drones, and their production numbers, even with distributed underground artisanal workshops instead of mass factory production, is still remarkably high. Between 2023 and 2024, Russian drone production jumped from 140,000 to 1.5 million, more than tenfold. And the jump from last year, from 1.5 million, Russia is probably going to produce somewhere around 4 million this year, at least, right? The Kiev regime is talking that Russia will be producing 300,000 FPV drones a month. 300,000 FPV drones a month this year. And Zelensky himself said that Russia will be producing 500 of their Garan long-range strike drones every day. Every day. So if they're producing 500 every day, you got to figure you're probably going to be hit with 400 or 500 at the least every day. This is the drone war of attrition, and it is just increasing, both tactically on the battlefield and strategically with these long-range strikes. So to the offensives, right? Sorry, long segue on drones. There was a lot of drone news this week, so I was suffused in drones. But on the offensives, okay, so Russia is exerting offensive pressure all along the contact line, right? Heavy everywhere. And part of the goal, again, war of attrition, is to spread the manpower of the Kiev regime out even further to exploit the shortage of manpower that they have relative to Russia. Shortage of both quantity and increasingly of quality, as they rely ever more on forced conscripts and have less, trained and experienced personnel to fight. There's particularly big news about Russian. Again, I don't want to call it an offensive, because, technically you could consider it that way, but usually when we're talking, as far as I'm concerned, Russia is always on the offensive. They've been on the offensive since the Kiev regime failed Southern offensive, NATO planned offensive in the summer of 2023. I'd like to differentiate between constant attritional offensive pressure and a larger new injection of forces, often in a theater where it hasn't been seen before. So two of the things that the Kiev regime have been complaining loudly about as offensives this week are Russia with 50,000 troops entering the Sumy region, right? So we're talking the northern border between Russia and Ukraine. It just really helps when you pull up a map if you're really interested, right? This is where we saw the Kursk incursion, the Belgorod incursions, and the like. On the Russian side, going from west to east, it's Bryansk, then the Kursk region, then the Belgorod region. On the Kiev regime side, it is Chernigov region, Sumy region, and then Kharkov region. And basically, because of the Kiev regime's incursions into Kursk, which was finally driven back, attempted incursions into Bryansk, and multiple attempted incursions into Belgorod, Putin has ordered the creation of a buffer zone created across all of the adjoining 3 Kiev regime territories. So Chernigov, Sumy, and Kharkov. And Putin has actually said it before, more than a year ago about Kharkov, but now he's including all 3 of these regions, and they're very serious about this. So they've got at least 50,000 in the Kursk region, now moving into the Sumy region. They've already taken somewhere upwards of half a dozen settlements in the Sumy region, and they're starting to pick the contact line up in Kharkov region again as well. Now, first of all, the Kiev regime complaining about Russian forces in Sumy. Well, you invaded Kursk.
Right.
Russia pushes you out of Kursk. They've got a whole bunch of troops there that pushed you out of Kursk. It only makes sense to move them forward, along the contact line where they came from, to prevent any further such incursions. So they don't get to complain about that at all. Same thing in the Kursk region, right? The movement into Kursk region by Russia was justified by the attacks, both missile strikes and the neo-Nazi definitively neo-Nazi incursions into Belgorod regions a couple years in a row, actually. Now, 50,000 troops in both of these regions, it's not enough, anywhere near enough to take Kharkov city, Ukraine's second largest city, 2 million people, and 50,000 is nowhere even near enough, on a smaller scale, to take Sumy, which is a city of some 250,000 before the war. So at the moment, yes, the goal of these is to create buffer zones, right? You want to call this an offensive? Sure. It's not a big dramatic offensive. It's a slow grinding, pushing you back. One, to prevent you from making more incursions into this region, but there's also a reason for it related to the drone war, these long-range drone strikes, because the majority of those long-range drone strikes that have the capability of are targeting Moscow have to come from that northern Sumy area, because that's the shortest distance, marking near the maximum range of the Kiev regime's long-range drones. So by pushing them further back in Sumy, you push them increasingly further out of long-range drones that are capable of hitting Moscow. Now, there's always evolution in drones. Every few months, the evolution cycle is so ranges keep increasing, but it doesn't mean that you stop trying to push them back out of range. So the buffer zone that Russia is creating there, it's not going to be dramatic. They're not going to seize Sumy city. There's not going to be lightning tank advances. It is a grinding pushback to prevent incursions on the ground, like we saw in Kursk and Belgorod, but also to attempt to limit the amount and the capability of long-range strikes to hit Moscow and other vital centers like Kazan, where a number of Russia's most important military industrial complex facilities, including drone production, are.
Okay, that's so interesting. I know that, like you were saying, Putin has talked about this need for a buffer zone before, and now he's kind of bringing it up again. And it's also interesting to watch in all of the reports that we get here in the West from the establishment media here, right? They act as though they are so shocked that even though these talks are ongoing between Russia and Ukraine, Russia and the US, that Russia would still be continuing with these strikes, that they would still be amassing troops in any way, as if Russia is supposed to just approach the talks and then just say, okay, yeah, you know what, we're done with the war. We'll agree to whatever deal that you throw at us, when Russia has said the exact opposite, right? They're like, we're happy to talk, but this war is still going to continue. And there's still this focus by the media on the territory, right? On, oh, Russia hasn't gained that much land. But as you're pointing out there, it's also interesting to watch the ways in which they are really grinding down the Kiev's forces, and yet we see the West in this place where, sure, you've got, it was interesting to see Germany's brand new chancellor kind of playing his role and saying, oh, yeah, sure, these restrictions have been lifted. But what did you make of his statements and the fact that there are still these long range strikes ongoing? So clearly, NATO, all of these key members in NATO are still directly involved.
Okay, so first of all, when it comes to this, thaw outrage that Russia is not giving the West the ceasefire they need to try to stabilize their proxy regime when their defenses, their front lines are crumbling everywhere. This is this game where the outrage is probably real, but of course it is completely devoid of any history or context. Most wars, the wars continue while the diplomatic process starts. Oh, I don't know, the Vietnam War, where when the U.S. was attempting to negotiate their retreat out of Vietnam, the negotiations went on for years of conflict, right? That didn't stop them. The Korean War, even Trump's negotiated retreat of the U.S. from Afghanistan with the Taliban. The Taliban didn't give them a free card. Why? Because the side that is winning doesn't want to let off the pressure of the side that is losing, because that helps, that pressure helps leverage their diplomatic process, right? Of course. And we've also, of course, seen these ceasefires being used, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, the electrical infrastructure ceasefire, everything is always used and misused to pump more weapons, to conduct more forced conscription into the Kiev regime. I mean, so, no, that game is over. The Kremlin is not going to give the West a breather to repump more arms and give the Kiev regime a chance to forcibly conscript more people off the street like dogs. During the negotiation process, you can agree to our terms. If you don't, then the talks will continue, but the battlefield will continue, and that's because Russia has the leverage, and the Kiev regime and its Western backers don't have any cards to play. They've tried. I'm almost certain this big increase in long-range drone strikes over the last week was an attempt to push Russia towards the ceasefire that they have been saying no about for, I don't know, more than a year now at this point. It did not have that. If that was the goal, it did not have the desired effect at all. The answer is still niet. You will agree to our terms for a permanent settlement of this conflict on our terms, or we'll continue the pressure on the battlefield. And until you do cry uncle and agree to our terms, the pressure will continue. You don't get another breather. That's it.
And it's so crazy to me when you have countries like the UK, France, Germany talking about all of the troops that they want to flood Ukraine with as soon as there is a ceasefire. It's like, why would Russia agree to not only stop there and halt their own momentum, but then to take it a step further and be like, yeah, sure, NATO, have another chance at rebuilding Kiev's military. It's like, it is not logical, but they continue to proceed in that way. And speaking of, I also thought it was interesting that the New York Times editorial board published an op-ed on Thursday. Their initial title, they tweaked it afterwards. So their current title is "If Trump Walks Away from Ukraine."
Narrative management.
Right. They say that he looks weak and Putin wins. Now, they added in that he looks weak after they published it, but they seem to expect Trump to do the Joe Biden, right? Add more sanctions on Russia, send more weapons to Ukraine, continue on with this war, keep Kiev on life support for as long as possible until Kiev crumbles, essentially. And they're really putting the pressure on Trump. But I mean, how do you view the Trump administration's handling of the conflict? We already are seeing a continuation of Biden's policies in multiple areas. So should we expect that to continue even as Kiev continues to be at a disadvantage, and even as the media continues to act like, oh, poor Ukraine, Russia is just bombing them left and right.
Yeah, so I actually think that people should read this. I hadn't read it until you pointed it to my attention myself. I could only suffer so much New York Times editorial board in a week. But anyway, so it's if Trump walks away from Ukraine now, Putin wins. Now, the first thing that struck me is the tone. This, coming from the New York Times, is one of the most complimentary portrayals of Trump, right? No orange man, blah, blah, blah. They were actually, well, Trump is right about this and this and this. But if he doesn't do this, then there'll be consequences. But my point is, they were trying to butter him up to win this argument with him. It was not necessarily an attack on him, but actually a complimentary appeal that he should adopt this policy. That smacks of a little bit of desperation there on their part, because the fourth estate in the United States is as politically and ideologically committed to this conflict as a part of the U.S. government, which is why it's called the fourth estate, as anything else has been. And that is a direct continuance from the Biden years, right? And if Trump returns to the Brandon 2.0 policy of more ineffective sanctions, and do we have any weapons left on the shelf at all? We'll send those to that's essentially what they're demanding. Somehow that will increase the Kiev regime's diplomatic capability in negotiations. That's the way it is presented. Now, one of the constant copes in this, right? So we've moved from the Kiev regime is winning, right, to it's a stalemate. Now we are at, yes, Russia is winning, and yes, they're moving forward, but they're moving forward slowly, and it's at great cost. That Russia is suffering some type of massive casualties. Now, Russia's taking too many casualties. It's a war. There's no question. That's subjective, though. Objectively, compared to the Kiev regime, the reality of the situation that the Western mainstream media is still in complete denial about, but is self-evident from everything on the battlefield, is that Russia's casualties in comparison to the Kiev regimes are a fraction. So this game of advancing slowly at great cost, that is the new Ukraine is winning, right? It is a false narrative that they are clinging to like a life preserver with all of their might. But that will in time be punctured, and they'll be reaching for the next piece of Titanic driftwood or whatever is necessary to keep them afloat until this conflict is over. And then they'll find some excuse to blame it all on, like, oh, if only Biden had given all the weapons in the first week of the war, then it would have been completely, they'll try to blame it on something else. This New York Times editorial board was, yes, a plea for Trump to return to the Biden policy. And they're right, though. I mean, Trump is going to look weak, and certainly the New York Times will be one of the loudest ones braying about how weak he is if he walks away from this, right? If he doesn't walk away from this and he returns to the Biden policy, Russia is still going to achieve the results. It might take a little bit longer, and Trump is still going to look weak. It's not a great situation. But if Trump were a smart man, which, okay, whatever, I know there's still some Trump fanboys out there, what he would do is walk away from this and blame Biden as loudly as possible. Never mind, of course, that he likes to brag all the time about, oh, he sent the javelins to Ukraine that were destroying Russian tanks, and the buildup of the CIA and the reorganization of the Kiev regime under U.S. control that happened all during his first administration. Never mind all that. But if he was smart, he would blame it all on Biden and try to walk away. But he probably won't be able to do that because there is too much institutional pressure against Russia and in favor of this conflict in the United States, in the media, in the intelligence services, in the security services, in the Pentagon, in the military industrial complex, across the Atlantic in Europe. It's just too much. There will be too much pressure on him, and there will be this constant, you will look weak. You will be remembered as the man who surrendered Ukraine to Putin. If you want peace, you have to be strong. If you want to end the conflict, you've got to escalate to get there. And this is all, I mean, we can hear it all happening in real time, but it's been self-evident, and there's just too much. Trump is not strong enough. He doesn't have a strong enough team that has real opposition to this conflict. There's only a handful of them, right? And most of them are neocons and war hawks and everything. So I would like to see something opposite, but it's not going to happen. And Trump is more and more going to find himself sucked back into the Biden positions of, I don't know, he already bombed the Houthis like Biden did to no effect and walked away from it. All of these games with Iran that probably still won't escalate to conflict, but just like Biden and Biden's policies in Ukraine as well, inevitably, step by step, Trump is finding himself trapped back into. Whether he ever really wanted to avoid them, or that's just part of his buffoonish mafia style deal making tactics, that's neither here nor there. In the end of the result, just as much for Trump as every other US president who takes the office, it is very, very hard to change the course of US interests and geopolitics, even to the slightest degree. And I remember George W. Bush saying that he wanted to get away from international involvement and focus on domestic things. Obama saying the same thing. And then, right up to Trump and Biden and today. To be fair, I don't think Biden ever said that he wants to stop focusing on international events.
Yeah, he may be the only one.
Yeah, he might be the only one. But, it's a repeat thing throughout U.S. And every 4 years that come around that a new president, the American electorate is fooled into thinking the same thing again, like Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football, and nothing ever changes. The pursuit of hegemony and primacy is hardwired into the U.S. state, no matter who the president is, and until there's some dramatic economic and political catastrophe in the United States that deeply shocks the entirety of the system, there is no real chance of change or changing course, even to more than a fraction of a degree.
Yeah, and I hope that people start learning that. I know that when Trump got into office, there was a lot of hope, right? There were a lot of people who said, no, he campaigned on this. He promised he was going to do this. He's going to let it be Biden's war. And we're only a few months in, and we're seeing the continuation of those policies. And yeah, I'm with you. When you've got the New York Times being like, hey, it's okay. We're harming Russia, right? Russia's paying a great cost. It's like, that's wishful thinking in the same way that it was wishful thinking when they said that Kiev was winning.
That's another false narrative, by the way. As the U.S. General Cavioli, the supreme commander of NATO forces in Europe, has testified multiple times, the Russian our military is bigger, better trained, more combat experienced, at the cutting edge of drone and other warfare, and their military industrial complex is kicked up to an unfathomable degree. Even the German defense minister Pistorius has admitted that Russia is producing far more at this point than they actually need for the SMO, and they're shelving it, right? So no, false narrative. This is not making Russia weaker. It's actually making Russia stronger economically as well. The Russian economy keeps growing. Is your economy kicking at 4%? No. Russia is getting stronger. And at the end of this, they're going to be still stronger and angry.
Yeah, and all of the US and their allies that they do have, it's not looking too good for them. But hey, this is the fight that the US picked, right? It did not have to be like this. In fact, Russia went to great lengths to try to make sure that we didn't get to this point, and they continued, they being the US, continued to poke the bear, and this is how we have gotten to this point. Certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I always appreciate you taking the time to join me to break down all of the latest here. International relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda, thanks so much for your time and insight.
Thanks for having me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also find Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.